I'm Jake Loveless, CEO and co-founder here at EdgeMesh, and today we're going to be talking about PageSpeed. We're going to talk about speed in general, and then we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the Lighthouse and Core Web Vitals. But just to kind of kick us off, so we want to talk about the value of speed, right? What is the value of improving these numbers, and kind of how do you estimate that ROI? Obviously, kind of everybody knows that speed matters, but there's lots of public pieces that can do it, but also a lot of ways that you can kind of see what that impact is internally. At a very high level, I always say that speed is an enhancing drug, which means it kind of takes your existing website key performance indicators and it just improves them all. So the classic one is like, oh, you get an increase in conversion rate, and that's very, very, very true, right? So there's an incredibly strong, about as strong as you can get in statistics, relationship between time to interactive, which is kind of how long a page takes until a user can scroll or click or add to cart, and the actual conversion rate, right? The actual ability to complete that conversion event, which is generally a purchase. It also decreases bounce rate. And a lot of this is, when a page is blank, we forget that customers really don't know if the site even works. And even though our websites, are up all the time, customers interact with a lot of sites that are down a lot of times. So, kind of the classic metric is 53% of users will abandon a page that takes more than 3 seconds to load. And that's certainly true, although it is a bit lower than 3 seconds today. It's probably closer to about 2.6. But an often overlooked metric is how fast customers will bounce while that page remains blank. And their tolerance for that blank website before you get to what's called the first paint has kind of dropped pretty precipitously over the last 5 years, especially on mobile, right? Because you're on different networks and things like that. And then kind of a bit more nebulous and a little bit more difficult to kind of track, but certainly true, is the relationship between speed and search rank. Now, I'll caveat this by saying that, Google's Core Web Vitals program, which is kind of Google's taking the alphabet soup of metrics that are how you measure page speed. Unfortunately, page speed isn't just one thing. And trying to simplify it down to a subset of metrics. Originally, it was 3. Now it's kind of expanded a bit to 5 or 6. But largely, these are used to penalize. If you've got a very slow website, then Google obviously wants to apply a penalty there, or win in the event of a tie. The other big benefit for speed in terms of search is actually much more simple. So Google's crawling engine costs money to run. And as it goes and crawls your website, the faster that website responds, the more of that website it can index. And so, kind of one of the big things in performance, kind of performance enhancement of a site is thinking about that actual crawling pipeline. So discovery, which generally sitemaps, and internal linking, that's kind of like the classic SEO land. But then you get to actual crawlability, right? Can the crawler crawl this site? You might be like, of course it can. And it's like, actually, you might be surprised. So if your site lays out a bunch of content client-side in JavaScript, right? If it's got a lot of JavaScript on the page, the crawler can't run the JavaScript. It just kind of reads text. And if it sees a lot of JavaScript, it'll actually abandon the crawl and do what's called, it'll pass that page to what's called the render pipeline, which is a whole nother process in Google that will fire up a browser and actually go render that page, and then save down the resulting HTML. And then the indexer will eventually pick up that HTML. And if that sounds like it takes a long time, it takes a long time. So If you can do what's called dynamic rendering, pre-rendering, something we do at EdgeMesh, but the idea is that when the crawler shows up, you want to deliver the crawler kind of flat HTML. And these are just kind of like some of them, right? Like I said, speed's an enhancing drug. So, we've seen relationships with average order value, right? Average order value increases. Why? Customers generally arrive with some level of purchase intent. I want to buy the hair tie. And because the shopping experience is so quick, especially product to product to product, I end up buying what I want instead of just what I need. And we kind of see that time and time again. And really just kind of, this is law of large numbers data. I mean, it's shockingly accurate, kind of scaling down to sites of different sizes. But, nobody arrives at the website for free, right? We either pay with content or we pay with hard dollars. So, abandonment or lack of engagement in the site sometimes is speed. Actually, oftentimes it is speed. We actually have a white paper that's on the website called Metrics That Matter that includes some segments for Google Analytics that allows you to kind of get a feeling of like roughly how much of your traffic is not engaged. And then you can start to kind of put some ROI around that, kind of put some cost behind it and start to kind of move on your speed journey. So, and of course it has effects down funnel. 70% are less likely to buy, 3/4 move to competitors, and basically they don't return. So we know that, returning customers are the best customers because we've already paid to acquire them. What's actually not on this slide, but came out from McKinsey recently was the kind of lack of recommendation. So 96% of customers are unlikely to recommend a site to a friend or their kind of influence network if they have a poor site experience. And again, you can kind of see the impact of these things, right? You can see it in conversion rate, you can see it in average order value. Kind of looking at a Steal a Good store here as an example in the top row. But we see it kind of time and time again. And, if you're a Shopify-based customer, Shopify very much talks about speed. There are some inherent limitations in the platform, but, when you get to a certain point, you can kind of enhance that platform beyond Shopify Plus, which is really where we come in. And if you're on things like Magento and WordPress and Salesforce Commerce Cloud, all these things, same things apply. And again, some of the things we're going to talk about today, you can do yourself, or you can reach out to us and become a customer, and we can certainly, most of the stuff we actually do automatically for you. So let's talk about this page. This is probably my favorite tool and simultaneously my least favorite tool. So PageSpeed Insights, also known as Google Lighthouse, was originally built as an audit tool. And actually, it's a fantastic audit tool. And, we all know kind of that number that comes up with PageSpeed Insights, right? And we want to take that number from a low number to a big number. And it's just, we are, as human beings, we see a single number, we want to optimize that number. Before we kind of get into the details of that, I think it's important to note that Google PageSpeed Insight actually contains two completely disparate but very valuable pieces of data. So the top of PageSpeed Insights, which used to actually not be shown, but has been changed due to kind of the performance engineering community kind of coming back and being like, it would be great if we did this. But the top of PageSpeed Insights is what's called real user metrics. So this is data gathered in the field, and it records the 75th percentile of the user experience. In performance metrics, you never want to look at an average. An average is, it's completely meaningless. It doesn't help you at all. You need to look at the distribution of that metric, and either you can look at the median, which is kind of the middle, or the 75th percentile, which, right, that's saying, 75% of the customer base has experienced it in this metric or better, right? So if you're 75th percentile, largest contentful paint, which is kind of the big hero image generally, if that's a second and a half, it means 75% of customers experience this in a second and a half or faster. And so that's the top of the data. Core Web Vitals, Google Crux, which is the Chrome Real user experience. These are all the same thing. So a couple of caveats here. One, it only applies to Google Chrome. This data is only gathered in Chrome. So that means Chrome, not Chrome skins. So for example, there is no real user metric data in this report from anybody on iOS. Because the iOS version of Chrome is not actually a full version of Chrome. It actually runs the WebKit engine underneath the covers. It's kind of Safari in a different suit. So it's only Chrome. It's going to be kind of less mobile than you would normally think. You're going to get a lot of more Android devices skewed here. But this is the data that Google actually uses internally. So you can access it here in PageSpeed Insights. There's a publicly available data source in Google BigQuery. And you can go and query it and look at it historically. And when you query the raw data, you'll note that there's a lot more data than kind of what you see here. But then below that, you get to the audit. So the audit, also known as Lighthouse, is kind of performance best practices applied. And so what I wanted to do today was just kind of show you an audit and then kind of show you some of those things fixed so that we can kind of see the impact of performing some of these actual suggestions. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of hop out, and you can always go to PageSpeed Insights, the site, and you can just run a test, you know, put in a website like this, and you can run a test. And what happens is this will run, it'll actually run this Lighthouse audit, spinning up a browser, loading the Lighthouse code, running the audit on a remote server somewhere at Google. So it does take a little while to come back. Alternatively, you can actually run it right in the browser. So Google Lighthouse is built into the browser, into the Google Chrome browser. So there's a tab here called Lighthouse. And this is kind of nice because it allows you to run these tests, you know, without waiting on a third-party server. You can just do it yourself. So just real quick, a couple of the key metrics here. So first, contentful paint. Again, how long that page takes to go from blank to non-blank. These are synthetic tests, right? We're spinning up a website. We're clearing the cache. We're going to this page. We're loading a single page, and we're measuring these metrics. Time to interactive. This is probably not what it is in the real. Actually, it's definitely not what it is in the real world. But again, this is kind of an audit, so we're really going through. Probably the biggest one is always the total blocking time. So the browser is single-threaded. It can only do one thing at a time. There are exceptions to that with things like web workers and kind of asynchronous responses. But fundamentally, there's what's called the main thread, and that thread has to kind of work through its process. So if you've got blocking content, like a style sheet's blocking because the browser needs to read that style sheet to determine what to do, then that's going to delay kind of the layout of the page. Largest contentful paint, generally the biggest image on the site. Layout shift, not really a performance metric, more of a design metric, but very important. Layout shift is when you know, a page actually moves while it's laying out. So very annoying because you can imagine reading the text and then it moves and then it jumps up, and that's not great. So now we get into the opportunities. Some of the biggest ones are around unused JavaScript. There's only so much you can do about this. Most of the stuff is third-party code. This is saying that, you know, there are opportunities to shrink this JavaScript. What's a lot more actionable is to either first party this, that actually goes a surprisingly big way, so that you can apply proper compression. So instead of serving this off of, say, vendor.foo.com, actually take that script and put it onto Origin. You'll save a connection setup. You'll ensure that you get kind of universal compression, right? If you've got your site compressed, if you're on a platform, this one's on Shopify, so that would help. But what is a lot more kind of actionable is deferring this stuff. So you can either apply the defer attribute to this JavaScript, or you can use some more robust tools. We actually include one in our Edge Mesh client product as well as our server product, called the script loader, which allows you to just kind of put an attribute on a script and say, hey, I know the script is used for tracking, so just go ahead and load it after the interactive event. Don't delay the page. So what's happening in this particular case with Allbirds here is we've just got a lot of JavaScript that's kind of unused, and it's blocking. The largest paint, this is generally the hero image. This is a really simple, really quick fix. Just add the loading equals eager lazy, the loading equals eager attribute to the image, and go ahead and preload that image. If you've got a source set, it's a little bit more complicated to load preload a source set, but it's still very possible. And if you're on a platform like Edge Mesh, there's, I'm sure, other platforms out there that can do this, but it'll implement what's called a 103 hint, which means the browser connects to the site. We actually kind of look at the link headers, and effectively at the edge, we respond with like, hey, we're going to send you the HTML for this page in a second, but in the meantime, can you go pre-download this image into the browser? So we just send back a different response code called a 103 before we respond with a 200, which is the actual page. These are those render blocking resources. Again, style sheets are render blocking. It is actually worth going through the effort of kind of minimizing that CSS and finding what's called the critical CSS, and then try to get the rest of the CSS to load later. Another huge mistake we see a lot is a CSS file that includes another CSS file, or a CSS file that imports another CSS file. That is like a car crash for the browser. It's a speculative parser. And so when it hits CSS file, it's got to stop. It's got to check it. If you're importing another CSS file, it has to download that and then check it, and then it can progress. So generally, you can get kind of a big win by just kind of flattening those CSS dependencies. Defer off-screen images. Everybody knows about lazy loading. What I can see here, just because we kind of do this for a living, this is being done with JavaScript. So this is a JavaScript client-side lazy loader, a really good model a few years back. Luckily now the browsers all have native lazy loading, so the best JavaScript is the JavaScript you don't ship. So there's really no reason to actually do client-side lazy loading. You can do it all kind of natively with the browser, save all that JavaScript. Again, kind of looking at third parties, script defers, or ideally something like a script loader, where you're actually telling the browser, skip over this from parsing, I will come get it later. I can kind of show you an example of ours. And again, this is built into Edge Mesh client and server. It's a little bit more robust in server, but still available. So you can set what's called after interactive. You can just see this at docs.edgemesh.com. And you can see what happens in the client version. You effectively just change the type from application JavaScript to something that the browser doesn't know. And so when the browser sees this type, it's like, okay, I don't know what this is, and I'm just going to ignore it. And that allows it to skip right over it. And then once the page becomes interactive, we have some client-side code that will go back and then re-pull all this JavaScript. So all of these third parties can kind of do this. It's really important to make, we can't get rid of all the third parties. That's never going to happen. But what we can do is make sure that they're not impacting the render pipeline. A lot of more kind of common things that we see here. Be careful with listeners, right? You want to be careful with, if somebody scrolls, you don't want 50 events firing. Again, kind of deferring third-party JavaScript will actually solve a lot of that, even if you don't explicitly go through and solve it. setting height and width. That's also going to help the cumulative layouts shift. But most of the time here is actually the main thread work. A big part of this is just the jostling that the browser has to do. So let's actually see how this page loads, right? So first we get the HTML, and then this is all just kind of tracking code that was firing. Now we get our cookie banner. So we haven't even started to lay out the page. This is just, we just got the base HTML, and now we're starting to lay out the page. Something worth noting here, right? The base HTML is served over HTTP 3, which is kind of the newer version of HTTP. This is a Shopify backend, so it's actually using Cloudflare. But we can see that it takes about a second. It takes about a second because there's no edge cache there, so it's actually still going to Shopify server and pulling it. Then so the browser's already set up this connection to www.allbirds.com, starts parsing the HTML. The first thing it has to do is stop and open a connection to cookielaw.org, because that's where the next thing is. Then it's like, then it's got to stop again because it's got to open a connection to Yada. Then it's got to stop again because it's got to open a connection to cdn.shopify. And you can see kind of all the host names. Just imagine for the browser how difficult this is, right? You've got to open a socket, take the name, look it up, securely connect to it, negotiate the certificate, open the socket. Then you can start streaming the stuff in. And of course, now they're all different protocols, right? We got some H2, there's actually H1 on this site here, this thing. So the browser is being asked to do a fantastic amount of network juggling, underneath the covers, all so that we can just load this page. And that's why we're kind of, one of many reasons why we're kind of seeing it here. Now, let's take this exact same site and just load it up on EdgeMesh server, again, no tricks up our sleeve, like you can come here and see it. And so EdgeMesh server basically does optimizations to the HTML on the fly. So as we get the HTML from the source, we kind of do a lot of those things we just talked about. But a really, really big one of them is what's called domain unsharding, or removing those connections. So you can see now, right? We go and we get the HTML. It's nice. We get it in about half the time. And I'll bet if I get it again, it'll go much quicker. Let's just actually get it nice and clean. So yeah, now a little bit of an edge cache makes all the difference in the world, right? 1.2 seconds versus 130 milliseconds, 133 milliseconds. Now, we don't bring cookie law onto Origin because we don't do that automatically, because cookie law actually wants to use the IP to do some GDPR stuff. So we do just still have one little train wreck there. But now we're all on Origin. So the browser is just kind of like an engine that's at, kind of past idle and is now hitting like 6,000 RPM. We can start to multiplex over this socket and get back some of this stuff. And yeah, eventually we're going to have to make out some calls to some third parties, but the core content, right? Like the JavaScript, the CSS, the images, stuff like that. These guys are all trying to stay on Origin. You can actually see how much of this page is now on Origin, right? So just that domain unsharding can make a huge difference. And then of course, kind of automatic optimizations that we do around, things like image optimization, right? Creating dynamic source sets. We can automatically, detect the largest example paint image, apply that 103 hint I talked about. All the rest of the images, we can apply the loading equals lazy attribute. And how does this thing all work? Well, you go from a 2 to about a 50. And, let's kind of look at some of the individual metrics there. And, yeah, I mean, you're shaving about a second off of first paint. Timed interactive gets a lot faster because there's a lot less jostling the browser has to do. And also we're kind of deferring some of the stuff. So you can actually see the total blocking. I mean, in this case, it goes down to 0. But that's just because a lot of the stuff is being moved out of the way. The largest paint, that kind of hero image is, 6 seconds versus 11. So this is that happening automatically for you. But again, as developers, engineers, ecom managers, a lot of these things can be done pretty straightforward. So the ones I would, again, just re-highlight, looking at things like a script loader. Again, ours is built into Edge Mesh Client, which is not expensive. So if you're not kind of at the scale to use Edge Mesh Server, kind of our larger scale infrastructure for bigger brands, Edge Mesh Client's great. It gives you real user metrics in real time, and you can actually use the script loader. And then the other one would be kind of moving away from lazy sizes.js and kind of these client-side lazy loaders for images, and start moving towards the browser's native lazy loader. So with that, I'm going to stop my share. Okay, great. And if you want some more information, there's documentation on script loaders and kind of some of the general optimizations we discussed is at docs.edgemesh.com. Alternatively, just come to edgemesh.com. If you want to set up a call with the sales partner. They'd be happy to kind of spin you up a copy of your site and let you see kind of what, from an automated standpoint, what the actual performance impact could be. And all right, with that, wishing everybody a great holiday shopping season. Talk to you soon.